They say a blood debt ends when someone dies, but Nico Moretti is about to discover that some debts were never his to collect, because the real damage was done long before he ever arrived. Tonight, inside a Manhattan penthouse reeking of bourbon and desperation, a dying empire's last bargaining chip isn't money. It isn't property. It isn't a name. It's a woman. His name is Graham Blackwell. Her name is Vivian, and the moment Nico says yes, he stops being the most dangerous man in the room. If you're watching this story, hit like, drop your city in the comments, and follow until the very end. I want to see how far this story travels. The penthouse smelled like fear and old money. Nico Moretti stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown Manhattan, hands loose at his sides, watching the city bleed neon into the November sky. He hadn't sat down since he arrived. He never sat down in rooms that belonged to men he intended to destroy. Sitting implied comfort. Comfort implied he had forgotten why he came. He hadn't forgotten. Marco Moretti had been 26 years old. He had been soft-spoken and quick to laugh, and completely, catastrophically wrong about who he could trust with the investment capital that was supposed to launch his restaurant chain. He had trusted a man with clean fingernails and a Harvard MBA and a smile that belonged on a campaign poster. He had trusted Graham Blackwell. 18 months later, Marco was dead. The official cause was a single gunshot wound delivered during what the police called a mugging gone wrong in the parking structure beneath his Hell's Kitchen apartment building. The shooter was never found. The money Marco had invested, $4 million of Moretti family capital that Marco had personally vouched for, had vanished into a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts that Graham Blackwell's lawyers had spent 8 months making untraceable. Nico had spent 11 months tracing them anyway. He hadn't come here tonight for a conversation. He had come here for a reckoning, the kind that ends with a body and a message, and the particular silence that follows when men who thought themselves untouchable finally understand they were wrong about that. But Graham Blackwell, it turned out, was not going to die quietly. I know what you want. Graham stood on the opposite side of the room near the wet bar, a crystal tumbler of scotch trembling visibly in his right hand. He was 61 years old, and he looked older than that tonight. Jowled, gray-skinned, the expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent hanging off shoulders that had been caving inward for months. I know exactly what you want, Moretti, and I'm telling you, there are better ways to resolve this. You killed my brother. I had nothing to do with... Don't. The word came out of Nico flat and final, the way a door slamming shut sounds final. He turned from the window. In the overhead light, his face was all sharp angles and controlled fury, 32 years old and carrying every one of them in the set of his jaw. Don't insult me with that sentence again. My people spent 11 months walking through every transaction, every wire transfer, every communication you sent to Victor Pelham in the 4 weeks before Marco died. I have the recordings. I have the emails. I have a man who was standing 12 feet away from Victor when he made the call. He crossed the room slowly, each step deliberate. You don't get to tell me what you had nothing to do with, not anymore. Graham's hand tightened around the glass. The scotch sloshed but didn't spill. Then what do you want? He said. Name it, whatever it costs. You don't have enough left to pay it. You have 32 million in hidden accounts that my forensic team has already flagged to a contact inside the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Nico stopped 6 feet away and watched the blood drain from Graham's face in real time. You have a Gulfstream G650 registered to a Delaware LLC that the FAA will be grounding by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. You have 3 properties overseas and a passport under a name that is no longer clean. He tilted his head slightly. You have nothing, Graham. I made sure of that before I walked through your door. The silence stretched long enough to hurt. Graham Blackwell set the tumbler down on the bar with a sound like a small bone breaking. His hands were shaking openly now, no longer making any attempt to hide it. Nico watched him cycle through the stages, disbelief, calculation, desperation, the way a man watches a rat find every exit blocked and finally stop running. There's something else, Graham said. His voice had changed. The practiced boardroom authority had collapsed out of it entirely, leaving something raw underneath. Something Nico recognized as the particular timbre of a man who has nothing left to lose and knows it. I'm listening. Nico said it without warmth. My daughter. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Nico didn't move. Vivienne. Graham said the name with the same tone a man might use to reference a piece of real estate. Accessible, transferable, transactional. She's 22, she's presentable, educated. She has no idea about any of my business dealings, which means she's clean. You need legitimacy, Moretti. Your operation has been under increased federal scrutiny since the Delancey situation last spring. A marriage into a family with the Blackwell name, even a diminished one, still carries weight in certain circles. It buys you cover. It buys you access. He paused. It buys you the appearance of a man who has reasons to be where he is. Nico stared at him. You're offering me your daughter, he said, making sure he had heard it correctly, making sure Graham could hear himself say it out loud in this room with no softening of context around it. I'm offering you a solution. She's a person. She's the only thing I have left that you haven't already taken. Graham's jaw tightened. For just a moment, something flickered across his face that might have been shame, but it passed too quickly to confirm. And she will comply. She won't cause problems. You have my word. The thing that moved through Nico's chest in that moment was not sympathy. It was not softness of any kind. It was something cold and precise. The same mechanism that had been driving him forward for 11 months. The absolute refusal to let grief become something shapeless. He had built his vengeance with the same methodical attention he brought to every operation, systematically, completely, without sentimentality. He looked at Graham Blackwell. This man who had shaken Marco's hand and smiled Marco's trusting smile back at him, and then arranged for Marco to be shot twice in a parking structure on a Tuesday night. And he made a decision. He said yes. Not because he wanted a wife, not because he wanted cover or legitimacy or the residual social capital of a falling family's name. He said yes because Graham Blackwell had just demonstrated, with absolute clarity, exactly what kind of man he was. A man who would trade his own child to save his skin. A man who felt nothing when he said the word daughter, except the cold arithmetic of survival. Nico said yes because he wanted Graham to believe he had won something. And because a spoiled billionaire's daughter, trapped inside a Moretti marriage and watching her father's world collapse around her, would suffer in ways that a quick death never could. That was what he told himself. Standing in that penthouse with the city burning orange outside the glass, and Graham Blackwell already exhaling with visible relief, Nico Moretti told himself that the grief and the rage and the 11 months of methodical destruction had finally arrived at their rightful conclusion. He had no idea how wrong he was. The wedding took place 6 days later. 6 days was long enough to have the papers drawn up, the venue secured, and the guest list assembled from the particular stratum of New York society that ran on mutual leverage rather than affection. The ceremony was held in a Tribeca event space that a Moretti-affiliated real estate company owned outright. 3 floors of climate-controlled marble and recessed lighting and fresh flowers that cost more than a used car. The chandeliers alone threw enough light to make everything look legitimate. Nico stood at the front of the room in a charcoal suit that his personal tailor had completed in 4 days, watching the doors at the far end of the hall. His underboss, Sal Cavarero, stood 2 feet to his left. Sal was 47, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that looked like it had been broken and repaired several times, which it had. He had been with Nico's father before he was with Nico, and he had a habit of speaking in a low, unhurried murmur that somehow cut through noise. "You sure about this?" Sal said, not moving his lips very much. "No. That's the most honest thing you've said in 6 days. Don't push it." Sal was quiet for a moment. Around them, 200 people who had each received a personal call from one of Nico's people, not an invitation, a call, arranged themselves in gilded chairs and kept their conversations to a careful murmur. There were 3 sitting federal judges in attendance, 2 former mayors, a senator who owed the Moretti organization a favor that he had been paying interest on for 9 years. There were men Nico had grown up watching his father manage, men who ran operations in Brooklyn and Queens and Newark, men who wore their expensive suits the same way he wore his, like armor. And there were the Wall Street names, the hedge fund managers and private equity partners who had done business with Graham Blackwell and now did business, directly or indirectly, with the infrastructure that Nico controlled. They were all here because they had been told to be here. They would all smile and drink and conduct themselves with the surface polish of legitimate society because that was how the arrangement worked. Everyone in this room understood that the wedding was not about love or even about alliance in any conventional sense. It was about a message. The doors opened. Vivienne Blackwell entered the room on her father's arm, and Nico's first thought was that she was nothing like what he'd expected. He had expected arrogance. Graham had sold her to him as a commodity, which meant Nico had unconsciously constructed a version of her in his mind. The pampered Manhattan heiress, the girl who had grown up in penthouses and summered in the Hamptons and treated the staff with the particular cruelty of someone who had never needed to consider them. He had expected a woman who would fight this arrangement with loud, entitled fury, and he had prepared himself for that, had considered it almost a secondary satisfaction, watching Graham's privileged daughter realize what her father had traded her for. What walked through those doors was something else entirely. She was wearing a white dress, fitted, formal, the kind of dress that probably cost a significant amount of money because it was understated in a way that was clearly expensive. Her dark hair was up. Her features were sharp and clean, the kind of face that photographers would call striking before they reached for beautiful. She was small, not fragile exactly, but compact in a way that made the large dress seem slightly incongruous, like clothing chosen to create the impression of taking up more space than the body underneath actually wanted to. She was not looking at anyone in the room. That was the thing Nico noticed with the specific attention he reserved for things that didn't fit. Her gaze was fixed at a middle distance. Not downcast, not defiant, but carefully directed at a point somewhere between the floor and the horizon, the particular focus of someone who has learned to be present in a room without actually inhabiting it. Her expression was composed. Not happy, not visibly frightened, but composed in a way that was slightly too controlled, the composure of active maintenance rather than natural ease. Graham was smiling. The smile was performative in the way that only Nico, watching closely, would have recognized as disconnected from anything underneath it. He guided his daughter down the aisle with a hand at her elbow, and Nico watched her response to that touch, the almost imperceptible straightening of her spine, the fractional tightening around the corners of her eyes, and filed it away without yet knowing what to make of it. The ceremony was brief and entirely procedural. An officiant, rings, language about commitment and partnership that sat strangely in a room full of people who ran their commitments entirely on the basis of what each party stood to lose. When it was over, Nico leaned close enough to speak quietly. "Welcome to your new prison," he said. He said it because he had planned to say it, because he wanted her to know from the first moment exactly what this was, wanted to remove any possibility that she might construct fantasies about what the next chapter of her life would look like. He said it as a cruelty with purpose, designed to establish the structure of their arrangement with perfect clarity. She turned and looked at him. Her eyes were dark, a deep, opaque brown that gave very little away. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds before looking away again, and in those 2 seconds, Nico did not see the reaction he had anticipated. No flash of outrage, no wounded pride, no fear in the shape he had expected fear to take. What he saw, briefly and then gone, was recognition. The expression of someone who has heard that sentence before, in different words, from a different mouth, and has already learned how to survive it. He didn't know what to do with that, so he filed it away alongside the other thing and turned to face the room. The reception lasted 3 hours. Vivienne sat beside him at the head table and spoke when spoken to, which was rarely, because the guests around them were more interested in conducting their own conversations than in engaging with a woman none of them had ever met before. She ate a small amount of what was placed in front of her. She accepted a glass of champagne and did not drink it. When Sal Cavarero leaned across to say something polite and introductory, she responded with brief, correct courtesy and then returned to the middle-distance focus she had maintained since walking through the doors. Nico watched her between conversations. He had expected at some point during the evening to feel the satisfaction he had been working toward for 11 months. The closure of a completed operation. Marco's death had left a wound in the center of his chest that he had been filling methodically, first with investigation, then with the systematic dismantling of Graham's financial infrastructure, and finally with the marriage that was supposed to represent the last and most prolonged instrument of the revenge he had constructed. He didn't feel satisfied. He felt unsettled in a way he didn't have a clean name for. At 11 o'clock, the cars were brought around. The drive to the Moretti estate on the north shore of Long Island took 40 minutes. Nico sat in the back of the lead SUV with Vivienne, separated by 18 inches of leather upholstery and the specific silence of two people who have no script for the situation they're in. His personal security detail, two vehicles, front and rear, moved through the overnight expressway traffic with the smooth efficiency of long practice. Vivienne sat with her hands folded in her lap, looking out the window at the highway lights strobing past in the dark. Nico watched her from his side of the seat. "You should know what this arrangement looks like going forward," he said. She turned from the window, waited. "The estate has 30 rooms. You'll have your own wing, bedroom, sitting room, bathroom. Staff will provide everything you need. You won't be locked in." He paused. "But you won't leave the property without clearance. You won't make contact with your father. You won't communicate with anyone outside the estate without my knowledge." She absorbed this, nodded once. "Is there anything you want to ask me?" he said. She was quiet for a moment, then, "Did he owe you a great deal?" The question surprised him. Not the words, but the tone. Measured, clinical almost, like someone gathering practical information rather than expressing outrage. "He owed me more than money," Nico said. "Yes." She turned back to the window. "He usually does." He had no idea what to do with that either. The estate sat behind 8-foot stone walls on 12 acres of manicured grounds above Long Island Sound. The main house was Georgian Revival, 4 stories, 14 bedrooms, a library that Nico's father had stocked and Nico had never used, a kitchen that the full-time staff kept in a state of permanent readiness. The grounds were lit with security lighting that turned the lawns pale gold. Through the iron gate, the driveway curved through landscaped gardens to the main entrance, where 2 of his inside staff were waiting with the particular alert stillness of people who had been briefed about the evening. Inside, the foyer was high-ceilinged and warm, lit by the chandelier his mother had chosen 20 years ago. His mother was dead, had been for 6 years, and sometimes walking in through that door felt like brushing against something he hadn't finished grieving. Tonight, he didn't have time for that. He showed Vivienne to her wing on the 2nd floor personally, not because he was performing any kind of courtesy, but because he wanted her to understand the physical parameters of where she would be living. The bedroom was large, furnished in neutral colors, with windows looking east over the Sound. The sitting room had bookshelves and a writing desk and a television she probably wouldn't use. The bathroom was fully stocked. "Housekeeper's name is Elena," he said at the doorway. "If you need anything, ask her. She'll be here from 7 until 9 every morning. You'll have lunch and dinner brought to you until—" He stopped, reconsidered the phrasing. "Until the arrangement settles." Vivienne stood in the center of the bedroom looking at the space with the careful attention of someone memorizing exits. She turned slowly, taking in the windows, the door, the dimensions of the room. "It's larger than I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" She didn't answer that. She set the small bag that his staff had brought from her apartment. She had apparently packed it herself 2 days ago, without explanation, onto the chair near the window. Her movements were deliberate and contained, no wasted motion, the body language of someone who had learned to exist in spaces without disturbing them. "Good night," Nico said. He left, but he didn't go far. He stood in the hallway outside her door for longer than he would have admitted to anyone, not listening, exactly, not hovering in any way he could readily explain, just standing there in the quiet of the house with the sound of the Long Island Sound somewhere beyond the walls and the particular weight of the evening pressing down on him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He had gotten everything he wanted. Graham Blackwell was financially gutted, his assets seized, his escape routes closed, his reputation about to be systematically demolished through a process that Nico's legal and media contacts had been constructing for 3 months. The man would spend the remainder of his life in a state of perpetual exposure and vulnerability, never able to feel safe, never able to run far enough. It was not the death Nico had originally intended. It was worse than that, and he had designed it to be worse than that. And now he had Graham's daughter. The intended last instrument, the prolonged humiliation, the trophy that would remind Graham every day of exactly how completely he had lost. The spoiled heiress trapped inside a Moretti marriage, stripped of her world. Except, she hadn't looked spoiled. She had looked careful. watchful in the specific way of someone who has learned that vigilance is not paranoia, but survival. She had answered his question in the car with the flat pragmatism of someone who had been in transactional situations before, many times, and understood the terms. Did he owe you a great deal? He usually does. What did that mean? Who is she talking about? Nico went to his own room at the opposite end of the hall and didn't sleep until well past 2 in the morning, turning the evening over in his mind with the same compulsive precision he brought to everything. He was still turning it over when he finally dropped into an uneasy unconsciousness. He woke at 5:30, which was normal for him. He dressed and went down to the kitchen, where the overnight security staff had left a pot of coffee on, and he stood at the kitchen window with his coffee in the dark before dawn and looked at the black glass of the Sound. By 6, he was in his private office on the ground floor, reviewing the overnight reports from his network. The Blackwell financial dismantlement was proceeding on schedule. The FAA filing on the Gulfstream had gone through. 3 of Graham's foreign accounts had been formally flagged. The senator who had been at the wedding last night had already sent a message through proper channels confirming that certain upcoming regulatory conversations would proceed in the direction they had been intended to proceed. All of it mechanical, all of it working exactly as designed. At 7:15, Elena arrived, and Nico told her where Vivian was and what she needed. At 8, he received a briefing from his head of security, a former Army Ranger named Dex Beaumont, who had been running Moretti perimeter operations for 4 years, and who communicated exclusively in the clipped economy of someone who considered full sentences an unnecessary luxury. "Quiet night," Dex reported. "New guest didn't leave her room." "She's not a guest." "Right." Dex made no adjustment to his expression. "New resident didn't leave her room." Nico sent him out and returned to his reports. He did not go back upstairs. He told himself that was by design, that the entire structure of this arrangement required him to maintain distance, to avoid anything that might be construed as softening, to keep the architecture of it cold and controlled and without ambiguity. She was here because her father had put her here. She would be treated adequately, not warmly, and she would understand through the quality of her daily life that she was in a situation she had not chosen and could not leave. That was the design. He kept to it for most of the day. At 7 that evening, he went upstairs. He told himself it was administrative, that he needed to confirm she had eaten, that the staff was functioning, that there were no logistical problems with the arrangements he had made. He knocked on the door to the sitting room with the brisk authority of someone attending to practical matters. She answered. She was wearing simple clothes, dark pants, a pale gray sweater that sat slightly too large on her frame, and her hair was down now, falling past her shoulders. She looked less composed than she had at the wedding, not worse exactly, but more real, as if the formal occasion had required one specific quality of performance that was no longer necessary. She stepped back to let him in. The sitting room was neat. She had arranged her few things with the minimal precision of someone accustomed to making very little look sufficient. There was a book on the table beside the armchair, one of the volumes from the shelves, a Raymond Carver collection, and a glass of water. The television had not been turned on. "Is everything adequate?" he asked. "Yes." "Do you need anything?" She looked at him as if processing whether the question was sincere. He wasn't entirely sure it was, which made the look feel more accurate than he was comfortable with. "No," she said. Nico looked around the room, then at her. She was standing near the window with her arms crossed loosely over her chest, not defensively, more like a self-containment, looking at him with those unrevealing dark eyes. "You should know," she said, "that whatever he told you about me, my father, it probably wasn't accurate. I didn't ask him much about you." "No." Her voice was even. "You probably didn't need to. You had your own reasons for the arrangement." "I did. And I'm the instrument." He didn't deny it. She nodded slightly, as if that confirmed something she had already calculated. "I've been an instrument before," she said. "I know how to function as one." The sentence was delivered without self-pity and without bitterness. That was what made it stop Nico mid-breath. Not the words, but the tone, the same flat pragmatism she had used in the car, the total absence of any quality that would indicate she found her own statement in any way remarkable. He stood there for a moment longer than he'd intended. "Get some sleep," he said, which was not what he had planned to say. He had planned something harder, something that would reestablish the exact terms of her situation. He said, "Get some sleep," and left. He was halfway down the hallway when he stopped walking. Something was moving under the surface of this, something he had not accounted for in the 11 months of methodical construction. He had built an architecture of revenge that was supposed to feel clean and definitive, and instead it felt like a room with the wrong dimensions, walls that didn't meet at the angles he had measured. He went back to his office and sat in the dark for a long time, which was not something Nico Moretti did. It was almost 9 o'clock when he heard the sound. Not loud. The estate was built solidly, walls thick, insulation between floors substantial, but he had long ago trained himself to register sounds that didn't belong in the ambient texture of a space, the way hunters learn to hear movement through static. This was coming from above him, from the second floor, from the direction of the east wing. He was already moving before he had consciously decided to move. He took the stairs quickly, no sound. The instinct of a man who has spent his adult life moving through situations where being heard first was a liability. The hallway on the second floor was dim, the overnight lighting a low amber strip along the baseboards. He moved toward the east wing, toward Vivian's room, and the sound became clearer as he approached. Low, strangled, the particular quality of distress that someone is actively working to suppress. He knocked once, and when there was no response, he opened the door. She was on the far side of the bed, on the floor, back against the wall with her knees drawn up. She wasn't crying. Her eyes were dry, and her expression was something beyond crying, something that lived on the other side of it, a particular quality of shutdown that Nico had seen once before in a man who had been under sustained duress for a very long time. She looked up at him when the door opened. Her eyes went wide. Not startled exactly, but the way an animal in the open goes still when something larger enters its field of vision. "I heard," he started. "I'm fine." The words came out fast and flat, rehearsed in the way that only gets that smooth through repetition. "You're not fine. You're on the floor." "I had a bad dream." She was already pulling herself up, using the wall to brace against, moving with the careful deliberateness of someone checking inventory after a stumble. "I'm sorry if I disturbed you." "You didn't disturb me." She was standing now, spine straight, the composure reapplied with the speed of long practice. But there was something in her color, too pale, a grayness at the edges, that the overhead light wasn't kind enough to hide. "Do you need—" He stopped. He didn't know how to finish that sentence in any way that wasn't either clinical or unconvincingly warm. "I'm fine," she said again. Nico looked at her standing there with her arms crossed over her chest and her jaw set and her eyes doing that thing again, that careful, absolute focus on nothing, and he made a decision that had nothing to do with the architecture of his revenge and everything to do with something else, something he had not anticipated needing to account for. "Come downstairs," he said. "I'll have the kitchen staff make something." She stared at him. "It's 9 o'clock," she said. "I know what time it is." A beat passed, then another. "All right," she said. The kitchen was warm with the residual heat of the day, and the staff had left bread and cold cuts and fruit on the counter in accordance with the standing evening instructions. Nico made coffee because it was something to do with his hands, and Vivian sat at the long kitchen table that his mother had chosen for exactly the same reasons mothers choose large kitchen tables, the implicit suggestion that there would always be people to fill it. She ate a small amount of bread with the same contained precision she had applied to everything else. She wrapped both hands around the coffee mug he set in front of her and looked down into it. "Does it happen often?" he asked. "The nights?" It took her a moment to answer. "Often enough," she said. He didn't press it. The kitchen was quiet around them, the kind of quiet that occurs in large houses in the late hours, slightly pressurized, full of the absence of the people who used to be in it. "What did you tell yourself," he said, when your father brought you the arrangement?" She looked up at that. "He didn't ask me," she said. "He told me, 4 days ago." A pause. "He came to my apartment and he told me that he had resolved a significant problem by making me available as part of a negotiated settlement, and that I would cooperate because there were things he could still do, even from where he was." She said it flatly, each word placed with the evenness of someone narrating a transaction. "He told me your name. He told me to be useful and to not make things difficult." The sentence arrived in Nico's chest like something physical, because there were things he could still do. He looked at this woman sitting in his kitchen at 9 o'clock at night with a coffee mug between her hands and her spine straight and her face composed into the expression of someone who has already processed the worst of what they were told and arrived on the other side of the processing. And something about that composure, so practiced, so complete, so utterly devoid of the outrage and indignation and wounded privilege that he had expected, began to press against the architecture of everything he had built. What did he mean? Nico said, keeping his voice even, when he said there were things he could still do. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she said, "He always had ways of making sure I understood how much I needed him to not be angry." The kitchen was very quiet. Nico set down his coffee mug. He thought about the sound he had heard from his office below. He thought about the way her spine had stiffened when Graham touched her elbow, walking her down the aisle. He thought about the recognition in her eyes when he told her, "Welcome to your new prison." Not fear, not outrage. Recognition. He thought about, "I've been an instrument before. I know how to function as one." And he began slowly, with the specific cold dread of a man who has made an irrevocable decision based on a premise that was wrong, to understand that he did not know this situation as well as he had believed he did. "Vivienne," he said. She looked at him. "How long has he been hurting you?" The silence that followed lasted long enough for the refrigerator to cycle through a mechanical hum and fall quiet again. She put the coffee mug down very carefully. She looked at the table. And then she looked back up at him with those dark, unrevealing eyes and said nothing at all, which was, Nico realized, the most complete answer she could have given him. He stood up from the table. "Go back to bed," he said. "Lock the door if it helps. I'll be downstairs." She stood too, moving toward the hall doorway, and then she stopped. "Why did you come upstairs?" she said. "When you heard me." He thought about that for a moment. "I don't know yet," he said, which was more honest than anything else he had said that day. She nodded once, as if that were acceptable, and walked back up the stairs. Nico stood in the kitchen alone and looked at the 2 coffee mugs on the table and felt the architecture of 11 months, the careful, methodical, grief-driven construction that he had built around the single purpose of making Graham Blackwell suffer the way Marco had suffered, begin to develop a crack he had not engineered. He was still standing there when his phone lit up with a message from his intelligence contact on the East Coast. A single line that told him Graham had not, in fact, been staying in Manhattan since the wedding. Graham had been moving, slowly, carefully, but moving, making his way toward an exit. Nico read it twice, and then he set the phone face down on the counter and stood in the quiet kitchen of his mother's house and thought about the sound Vivienne had made on the other side of a floor and the way she had said he always had ways of making sure, and the absolute composed flatness with which she had said, "I've been an instrument before." He went back to his office. He did not sleep. And in the morning, when Elena brought him his 7 o'clock briefing, he told her to make sure Vivienne's breakfast was warm and to make sure she was left entirely alone unless she asked for something. Elena looked at him for half a second longer than the instruction warranted, then nodded and went upstairs. Nico pulled up the surveillance file his network had compiled on Graham Blackwell's movements over the previous 72 hours. He was looking at a man who believed he was still running. He was about to find out what it felt like when the man he thought he had neutralized was not neutralized at all, but had simply been redirected. 3 floors up, behind a locked door, Vivienne Blackwell sat on the edge of a bed that wasn't hers, in a house she didn't know, and looked out at the Long Island Sound coming pale and gray in the early light. She pressed her left hand flat against the inside of her forearm, felt the ridge of an old scar under her sleeve, and thought, "This one is different." She wasn't sure yet whether different meant better or worse. That evening, Nico came upstairs with intention he hadn't had the night before. He knocked. She opened the door. He looked at her standing in the hallway light, and he said, "I need you to tell me something truthfully." "All right. The scar's on your arm." He said it directly because he had decided that indirection had done enough damage in this house. "Your father." The composure held for 3 full seconds. Then it cracked. Not dramatically, not with tears, just the smallest fracture in the controlled surface, a tightening around her eyes that was the compressed version of something enormous. "Yes," she said. Nico stood in the doorway and felt something move through the mechanism of his chest that he had not felt in 11 months. It was not grief this time. It was something colder than grief and more dangerous than anger, something that had no clean name but that pointed, with absolute precision, in a single direction. He said, "Show me." She reached for the hem of her sweater, and what Nico Moretti saw next would change everything he thought he knew about why he had come to that penthouse, what revenge actually looked like, and what kind of man he was willing to be. She reached for the hem of her sweater. Nico didn't move. He stood in the doorway with his shoulder against the frame and his arms loose at his sides, and he watched her hands. Steady, both of them, steadier than his were at that moment, which told him something he wasn't sure he wanted to know about how many times she had been in situations that required steadiness under duress. She pulled the sweater up and over her head in one motion and stood there in a plain white camisole and looked at him with her chin level and her eyes doing that careful middle distance thing, not looking at his face, not looking away, aiming somewhere that wasn't quite either. He looked at her back first because she turned slightly when she lifted the sweater, the automatic adjustment of someone who has done this before, shown herself, been examined, waited for the verdict. The camisole left her arms and shoulders visible. He had seen violence. He had been in rooms where violence had been done to bodies, had seen the evidence of deliberate harm in various stages of healing and permanence. He was not a man who flinched at damage. He had made a particular peace with the fact that damage existed in the world and that some of it passed through his hands. What he saw in Vivienne Blackwell's arms and shoulders was not the result of a single incident or even several incidents. It was a record. A long, patient, systematic record of harm delivered over time. Old scars gone silver and flat, newer ones still carrying color at the edges, burn marks in 2 places on her left forearm that were round and deliberate, the particular shape of deliberate, the kind of mark that required someone to hold something in one place long enough to mean it. He said nothing for a long moment. She kept her chin up, kept breathing at the same measured rate. She was not performing bravery, he realized. She had simply rehearsed this reveal enough times, in enough contexts, with enough different audiences, that she had found a way to stand inside it without it destroying her. That was somehow worse than if she had been shaking. "How old?" he said. "The oldest ones? Since I was about 15. She said it the way someone reads from a document, the factual delivery of data that has been separated from its emotional content through long practice. The most recent were 3 weeks before the wedding. 3 weeks before the wedding. Nico moved his jaw, felt the muscle in it tighten. He was aware, in a careful and deliberate way, of the rage that was moving through him, aware of it the way you are aware of standing water near a live wire, tracking it without touching it, because touching it would be catastrophic, and the situation required something other than catastrophe right now. "Put the sweater back on," he said, not harshly, the way you say it when you've seen enough. She pulled it back over her head. "Sit down," he said. She sat on the edge of the bed. He pulled the chair from the writing desk and set it 3 feet from her and sat in it, forearms on his knees, leaning slightly forward. Between them, the lamp threw a warm circle of light that made the room feel smaller than it was. "I'm going to ask you questions," he said. "You answer them honestly, all right?" She looked at him directly for the first time since he'd stepped into the doorway. "All right," she said. "Did anyone know?" A pause. There were people who suspected. Her hands were folded in her lap, fingers interlaced. "My mother's sister. She stopped being invited to the apartment when I was 17, a teacher at my school. He filed a report when I was 16. My father had it handled." Handled how? "He had a relationship with the school's board of directors. The teacher was let go by the end of the semester. The report was, it went somewhere that it didn't come back from." She said it without bitterness, which was the part that kept landing on Nico like something physical. The absence of bitterness implied the absence of surprise. And the absence of surprise meant this outcome: the erasure, the management, the smooth institutional burial of evidence, had been so consistent in her experience that she had stopped expecting anything different. "After I turned 18, she continued, unprompted, there weren't really witnesses in the same way. I had my own apartment by the time I was 20. He paid for it, which meant he had access. He paid for everything, school, the apartment, everything, which meant there was always a mechanism. If you stopped complying. Yes. Nico looked at his hands for a moment, then back at her. He told me you would cooperate, he said. That night in the penthouse. He said you'd cooperate because he still had things he could do. She nodded once. He would have taken the apartment, cut the accounts. There are people in his network who have done things for him before, made things difficult for people who inconvenienced him. A beat. I believed him. I still believe him. You don't need to anymore. The words came out of Nico's mouth before he had finished deciding to say them. He heard them land in the room and felt the irreversibility of them. The way certain statements close doors behind themselves. Vivian looked at him with an expression that was careful and complicated and entirely unconvinced. You brought me here to punish me, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of the situation's architecture delivered with the same flat accuracy she applied to everything. Whatever you've decided in the last 10 minutes doesn't change what the original design was. No, he said, it doesn't. So why should I believe that this... She gestured slightly, a small economical motion that took in the room, the house, the whole arrangement. All Sporus is different from any other version of the same thing. He didn't have a clean answer for that. He was aware of that, the absence of a clean answer. And he was aware that offering her something untrue would be worse than offering her nothing, because she had spent years in the custody of a man who was fluent in the particular language of false reassurance. You shouldn't, he said. Not yet. I haven't given you a reason. She held his gaze. Somewhere outside the windows, the sound moved against the shoreline with a low, unceasing sound. What happened to the person the arrangement was supposed to punish? She said quietly. Me. What happens to that now? It changes. Into what? He stood up. The chair scraped back softly against the floor. He moved to the window and looked out at the dark water for a moment, then turned back. I don't know the full shape of it yet, he said. But your father is not finished. He's moving. My people tracked him to a location in Newark 2 days ago, and he has travel documentation prepared under a secondary identity. He watched her absorb this. He intends to leave the country. He believes the financial dismantlement I've executed is the extent of what I can do to him, and that once he clears U.S. jurisdiction, he wins, she said. He thinks he wins. A silence. You're going to stop him, she said. Yes. She looked at her folded hands, then at him. When you do, she said, what happens to me? It was the right question, asked in the right way, and it sat between them in the lamplight with the full weight of everything it implied, not just the immediate logistics of her situation, but the deeper question of what she was now, in this house, in this arrangement, to the man who had accepted her as an instrument of grief and found something entirely different instead. Nico said, you stay here, safe, until it's finished. And after? After, you choose. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, no one has ever said that to me before. He didn't have a response for it. He went to the door. Get some sleep, he said, which was becoming a pattern that he was aware of and couldn't seem to change. I'll have Dex tighten the perimeter tonight. Your father has contacts. I don't think he'll move against the estate, but I'm not leaving it to chance. He wouldn't come here himself, she said. He doesn't do things himself. I know, but the people he sends do them themselves. He left the door and went downstairs and into his office, and sat at the desk under the cone of the desk lamp, and pulled up everything his network had compiled on Graham Blackwell in the previous 72 hours. And he went through it with the methodical attention of a man recalibrating the terms of a war. The morning came in cold. Sal arrived at the estate at 8 o'clock with 2 of Nico's senior lieutenants, Carver, who ran the network's financial intelligence arm, and a man named Reyes, who coordinated the East Coast surveillance operations. They assembled in the ground floor conference room, which had been his father's war room and retained that quality, the particular atmosphere of a space that had hosted difficult decisions. Nico stood at the head of the table. Graham is at a property in Montclair, Reyes said, setting a tablet on the table with a satellite image pulled up. The image showed a residential property, modest by Graham's standards, a rental, the kind of place you use when you need to not be found at any of your known addresses. He's been there since Sunday. We have visual confirmation from 2 separate positions. He has 2 men with him, private security, both formerly employed by a firm out of D.C. that we've seen before. They're professionals. How close to the airport? Newark Liberty is 22 minutes under normal conditions. Nico looked at the image. He's not flying commercial. No, we tracked a charter arrangement through a shell that's 3 steps removed from his primary holding company. Tail number is registered to a Cayman entity. Flight plan, when it gets filed, which it hasn't been yet, would theoretically show a routing through Reykjavik. Theoretically. He'd rebook from Reykjavik, probably Zurich, then anywhere. Reyes paused. He's patient. He's not moving until he's confident the coast is clear. He thinks it is, Carver said. He was younger than the others, mid-30s, with the compressed precision of someone who worked in numbers and had learned to see the world in terms of exposure and liability. The accounts we flagged, he knows about those, but he believes we've shown our hand. He thinks we've used our best intelligence and that what we've seized is the extent of what we could find. He's wrong, Nico said. Comprehensively, there are 4 accounts we haven't moved on yet that we've had under observation for 6 weeks. Combined value at last assessment, a little over 14 million. Carver set his own tablet on the table. The moment he activates any of those accounts to fund the charter or establish a new identity infrastructure, we'll know within 20 minutes. So we wait for him to move, or we make him move. Sal, who had been quiet until now, leaned forward with his elbows on the table. He had the particular quality of patience that comes from being in the same business for 20 years. Not slow, but calibrated. The patience of someone who had learned that timing was the variable that separated clean operations from expensive ones. If he feels pressure from another direction, he'll accelerate his timeline. Accelerated timelines produce mistakes. What direction? Nico said. His daughter. The room was quiet. Nico looked at Sal. What about her? He said, and his voice was even, but there was something under the evenness that Sal, who had known him since he was 19, heard clearly. He wants to know she's compliant, Sal said carefully. He built his exit plan on the assumption that she wouldn't cause him problems. If she started asking questions, legal questions, the kind that go on record, it would threaten that assumption. He'd feel exposed. Exposed men move. She's not a tool in this. Sal held his gaze. Nico, she's not involved in the operation. She stays out of it. He said it with the finality of a door closing, the same tone he had used in Graham's penthouse. Find another pressure point. Sal absorbed this, made no argument. Reyes and Carver exchanged a fractional look that Nico clocked and ignored. All right, Sal said. We use the Weston account. Graham has a standing relationship with a man named Weston who manages informal transfers. We have leverage on Weston that we haven't deployed. If Weston signals to Graham that one of the hidden accounts has been compromised, Graham accelerates and makes the call that tells us exactly where he's going and when. It was clean. Nico approved it. The meeting ended at 10. Sal stayed after the others filed out, which was characteristic of him. He had a way of waiting for the room to empty before saying the thing he had been sitting on during the meeting. She's not what you expected, Sal said. No. The girl. She has a name. Sal looked at him for a moment. The Vivian situation, he said carefully, adapting, is not what the arrangement called for. No, it's not. How much does that change? Nico picked up the tablet with the satellite image of Graham's Montclair location and looked at it. It changes the reason, he said. The outcome is the same. The reason matters, Sal said. Men who operate from grief make one kind of mistake. Men who operate from... He stopped, chose his word. Something else. They make a different kind. I know what I'm doing, Sal. You always do. Sal moved toward the door. Right up until you don't. He left. Nico sat with the tablet in his hands and the image of Graham's temporary shelter on its screen, and he thought about the round burn marks on Vivian's left forearm. 2 of them, perfectly placed. The considered placement of someone who knew how to deliver maximum impact with minimum visibility. He thought about 3 weeks before the wedding. He thought about the teacher who had filed a report when she was 16 and been erased from the institution within a semester. He thought about the 11 months he had spent building the architecture of his revenge, and how clean it had looked from inside his own head, the wronged brother, the guilty man, the proportional devastation of a life for a life. He had thought of himself as a man who operated by a code, even a brutal one, and the code had a clarity that grief needed the way fire needs oxygen. He had not thought about what was inside the penthouse before he arrived. He had thought about Graham. He had thought about Marco. He had thought about the offshore accounts, and the shell companies, and the man named Victor Pelham who had pulled the trigger on a Tuesday night in a Hell's Kitchen parking structure. He had not thought about Vivian. She had been a category, a function, a component of the machinery. He put the tablet down. At noon, Elena brought him a report that Vivian had come downstairs for breakfast, eaten in the kitchen, asked if she could access the library, and had been in the library since 9 o'clock. Elena reported it with the careful neutrality of a woman who had worked for the Moretti family for 11 years and had long since learned to observe without editorializing. "Is she all right?" Nico asked, which was not a question he had anticipated asking. "She seems," Elena considered, "focused. She found the Carver books. She's been reading." Nico nodded, went back to his work. He did not go to the library. At 4 in the afternoon, his phone rang. It was a number he recognized as a forwarded relay. His network's communication infrastructure had 4 layers of routing on sensitive calls. The voice on the other end was Reyes. "Weston made contact," Reyes said. 40 minutes ago. Graham received the signal. He's responding." "How?" "He made a call from the Montclair property. Encrypted, but we had the key. He's moved the charter timeline up. Flight is now scheduled for 2 days from tonight. He's activating the Reykjavik routing." 2 days. "Does he know we have the key?" Nico said. "No, he thinks the encryption is clean. He paid for state-of-the-art and got something that was state-of-the-art in 2019. All right, get Carver started on the account freeze sequence. I want all 4 of the remaining accounts locked simultaneously, time to execute 8 hours before the charter is scheduled to depart. Not before. I want him to find out at the airport." "That's risky," Reyes said. "At the airport he has his security with him and..." "I'll be at the airport," Nico said. A silence on the line. "Understood," Reyes said. He ended the call and sat with the phone in his hand and thought about 2 days. 2 days and Graham Blackwell would be in a car heading toward Newark Liberty Airport with bearer bonds and a secondary passport, and the absolute confidence of a man who believed he had successfully navigated the worst of his exposure. 2 days, and it would be over. He went to the library at 6 o'clock. Vivian was in the armchair nearest the window with the Carver collection open in her lap. She looked up when he came in. No flinching, he noted. The startled response that he had seen in her the first night was calibrating, just slightly, in a direction that looked marginally less like bracing for impact. "I wanted to tell you something," he said. She closed the book, waited. "It ends in 2 days," he said. "Your father is moving. We're positioned to intercept before he clears the country." He stood near the doorway because the library was a room he associated with his father, and he had unresolved business with that association. "You won't be involved. You won't know the details. But it will be finished." She was quiet for a moment. "What does finished mean?" she said. "It means he can't come back for you. It means whatever leverage he told you he still had, he won't have it. Any of it." A pause. "It means the mechanism is gone." Vivian looked at the closed book in her lap. "I stopped believing in finished things a long time ago," she said. "I know. That's why I'm telling you instead of asking you to take it on faith." She looked up at him. "You're going to be there yourself," she said. "When it happens." It wasn't a question. She had read something in the way he had said it. "Yes." "Because it's personal." "Yes." She looked at him for a long, measured moment. "He had Marco killed," she said. It was not a question either. She had assembled it from the pieces available. 11 months of Nico's precision, the intensity of the personal involvement, the particular quality of the anger that she had been close enough to, now to read in the way he held his jaw and the silence he went into when certain subjects came near. "My younger brother," Nico said, 26 years old. "I'm sorry," she said. He didn't know what to do with that. People had said it to him before, at the funeral, at the reception after, in the months that followed. And it had always felt like a hand reaching through glass, heard but untouching. She said it, and it landed differently. He suspected it was because she said it the way people say things when they know what loss actually feels like from the inside. "I have to make some calls," he said. She nodded. He was almost at the door when she said, "Nico." He turned. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully categorize. It had pieces of several things in it, gratitude and wariness, and something more tentative than either. "Thank you," she said. "For last night. The kitchen." A beat. "You didn't have to do that." He stood there for a moment. "No," he said. "I didn't." He left. He was halfway down the hall when his phone lit up with a message from Dex. 3 words that stopped him cold in the corridor. Perimeter breach. East wall. He was running before the phone was back in his pocket, because a perimeter breach at the east wall meant the side of the estate closest to the water, closest to the approach from the sound, and the only people who would come at this property from the water at 6 in the evening were people who had been sent by someone who knew the layout well enough to avoid the obvious entry points. Someone who had lived here. Someone who had been brought here. Someone who had described the property's security architecture to people who were now scaling the east wall in the early dark, moving toward a woman sitting alone in a library with her back to the window and a book in her hands, and absolutely no idea that the thing she had spent her whole life being afraid of had just arrived at the door. Dex's voice came through the earpiece, clipped and hard. 2 tangos on the east wall, 3rd one in the water, came up from the sound, armed. Nico was already at the library door. He hit it open with his shoulder and crossed the room in 4 strides and grabbed Vivienne by the arm. Not rough, but with the unambiguous authority of someone who does not have time to explain, and pulled her out of the armchair before she had fully processed that he was in the room. "What? Don't talk. Move." She moved. He had to give her that. She didn't freeze, didn't argue, didn't do any of the things that people who hadn't been trained for threat response did when threat response became suddenly necessary. She came up out of the chair and went where his hand directed her with the compact, immediate compliance of someone whose nervous system had been conditioned to rapid physical redirection. He registered that and filed it somewhere dark to think about later. He took her through the library's interior door into the connecting hallway, away from the east-facing windows, moving fast and low. The house's internal security protocol, which Dex had drilled into every staff member during the first week of every calendar year, called for a lockdown position on the ground floor's interior corridor, away from all exterior walls, pending threat assessment. It was a protocol designed for exactly this kind of incursion, unexpected, targeted, coming from an angle that suggested prior knowledge of the property layout. Prior knowledge. The thought hit him as he pushed Vivienne into the interior corridor and pressed himself against the wall beside the door, one hand already on the weapon at his hip. Prior knowledge of the east wall approach. Prior knowledge that the east wall's camera coverage had a 12-second rotation gap that occurred every 4 minutes, a gap that had been in place for 3 weeks while the replacement hardware was on order. Prior knowledge of the library's position in the house, east-facing, ground floor, back to the windows, occupied at this hour by a specific person. He got on the earpiece. "Dex, status. 2 on the east wall are down. Paulson and Martinez intercepted at the garden line. 3rd one from the water is still moving. He came in at the gap." A pause. "Nico." He knew the gap. "I know. That's internal." "I know." Vivienne was pressed against the corridor wall 3 feet from him, watching his face with the particular focused attention of someone reading a situation they don't have full information about. Her breathing was elevated but controlled. Her hands were flat against the wall behind her. "Someone told them about the gap," she said quietly. "Yes." "Someone inside the house?" "Yes." She absorbed this with the same contained precision she absorbed everything. Then, "How many people knew about it?" He looked at her. 6, he said. "Then you have a short list." He almost said something else, but Dex's voice cut through the earpiece again. "Got him. East Garden. He's down but breathing. Nico, you're going to want to talk to this one. He's carrying documentation." "What kind?" "The kind that has your name on it." He told Vivienne to stay in the corridor with Martinez, who had come around from the east garden line, breathing hard, a cut above his left eye that was going to need attention, and went through the house to the east garden entrance. The man on the ground was face down with his hands zip-tied behind him, and Dex's knee in the middle of his back. He was dressed in dark, non-reflective clothing, water-soaked from the sound approach, and he was breathing in the shallow, deliberate way of someone who had been winded and was managing pain and had enough professional training to keep his mouth shut until he had a reason to open it. Dex handed Nico a waterproof document sleeve. Inside it, a single folded page and a manila envelope. The page was a typed instruction sheet. No letterhead, no signature, but the language was operational. Movement instructions, timing, an address within the estate that was specific enough to make the back of Nico's neck go cold. The address was the library. The timing was the 6 o'clock hour. The instruction was retrieval, not termination. Bring her back intact. Bring her back. Nico opened the manila envelope. Inside were 8 photographs. Surveillance photos, long lens, taken over what appeared to be several days. The estate's exterior. The library window. Vivian in the library window at different times of day. The long lens image catching her at the armchair, at the bookshelf, once standing at the glass looking out at the sound. Somebody had been watching the estate for days. Somebody had been feeding that surveillance to Graham. And the instruction, bring her back intact, meant Graham had not sent these men to harm her. Graham had sent these men to take her back, to remove her from Nico's protection and return her to his control, because a daughter inside a Moretti estate was a complication in Graham's exit plan. But a daughter back under his thumb was a tool he could still use, even now, even here. Nico crouched down beside the man on the ground. "Who sent you?" he said. The man said nothing. Professional silence. Nico recognized it, had been in rooms with men who wore it, knew the only way through it was either time or leverage. He didn't have time. He reached into the man's soaked jacket pocket and found a phone. Waterproof case, burner, the last 3 calls all to a number he didn't recognize. He pocketed it and stood. "Get him inside," he said to Dex. "I want the name he was paid through, however long it takes." Understood. He walked back through the house. Martinez was still in the interior corridor with Vivian, pressing a folded cloth against the cut above his eye. Vivian was standing exactly where Nico had left her, arms crossed over her chest, and when Nico came through the door, she read something in his face before he had said a word. "My father sent them," she said. It was not a question. "Yes. He wants me back." "Yes." Her jaw tightened. It was the first time he had seen a crack in the composure that was something other than pain. This was anger, the first time he had seen genuine anger cross her face. And it was cold and compressed, and it aged her somehow, gave her features a quality of hard clarity. "He told them to bring me back intact," Nico said. "Not to harm you. He needs you functional. He always needs me functional." She said it with a bitterness that was precise and without heat. The bitterness of someone who knows exactly what they're worth in a specific economy and despises the clarity. "I'm more useful intact." She stopped. "He's accelerating." "Yes. Faster than we accounted for. He moved the charter up, and now he's moving to secure what he still considers his assets before he leaves." "I'm an asset." Nico looked at her. "Not to me," he said. She held his gaze. Something moved across her face that wasn't quite belief and wasn't quite its absence. Something suspended between the two, waiting for more evidence before it committed to either direction. "The gap in the camera coverage," she said. "Someone inside told him." "Yes." "Do you know who?" "Not yet." He left Martinez with her and went to find Sal. Sal was in the conference room with Carver and Reyes, all 3 of them having received the security alert through Dex's channel and assembled with the automatic coordination of men who had been through enough emergencies together to skip the stage where they waited to be told what to do. Nico put the document sleeve on the table. Sal looked at the instruction page, looked at the photographs. His expression went through a sequence that ended in something cold and still. "The camera gap," Nico said. "Who knew?" "In this room?" Sal said. "In this house." Sal looked at Reyes. Reyes said, "Dex, his 2 senior guys, Paulson and Martinez, Elena, and the maintenance contractor who flagged the hardware issue 3 weeks ago." "The contractor's an outside firm," Carver said. "Montella Security. We've used them for 8 years." 8 years is a long time to build a relationship with someone who pays better," Nico said. Sal's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His expression shifted. A small movement, fractional, the kind that on Sal's face represented something significant because Sal's face did not move easily. "Dex got the name," Sal said. "The man in the garden was paid through a transfer routed to a shell account. The shell account has a transaction history that traces back through 2 intermediaries to—" He looked up from the phone. "Montella Security." The contractor, 8 years. "Pull every job they've done on this property for the last 18 months, Nico said. "Every access log, every entry record, every conversation any of my people had with their staff." He was already thinking through the implications, the specific way this changed the topography of the situation. "Graham didn't get the layout from someone inside my organization. He got it from the contractors, from the people we paid to maintain our security." "Which means your people are clean," Carver said. "Which means my perimeter intelligence on Graham has been compromised for however long Montella has been feeding him information." He picked up the document sleeve. "He knows more about this estate than I realized. He knows Vivian is here. He knows which room she uses. He knows our coverage gaps." He put the sleeve back down. "He's not just running. He's been running an operation against me while I've been running one against him." Sal was quiet for a moment. "The charter is day after tomorrow," he said. "He moved it up once. He'll move it up again now that this failed." Nico looked at the photographs. Vivian at the library window, the long lens finding her through the glass. Tonight, probably. He'll know the retrieval failed within the hour. He'll recalculate. "So we lose the 2-day window," Reyes said. "We compress it." Nico moved to the wall where the operations map was pinned. The New York metro area. The Newark approaches. The airport layout that Reyes had pulled earlier in the day. He looked at it for a long moment. He has 2 men with him in Montclair, plus whatever security he can mobilize on short notice. If he moves tonight, he moves fast and light. Fast and light means mistakes. "Or it means he has a backup route we don't know about," Sal said. "Then we find it before he uses it." The room went to work. Nico stood at the map for 3 more minutes, running the geometry of it. The roads out of Montclair, the Newark approaches, the alternative private airfields within a 90-minute drive. Then he left Carver and Reyes to the logistics and went back to find Vivian. She was in the kitchen. Elena had materialized from somewhere in the house's upper floors with the reliable instinct of a woman who interpreted crisis as an occasion for practical comfort, and she had put tea on and set bread and cheese on the table, and Vivian was sitting at the kitchen table in the same chair she had sat in 2 nights ago, both hands around a mug, not drinking. Elena looked at Nico, read his face, and left the room with the discretion of someone who had spent 11 years learning when to disappear. Nico sat down across from Vivian. "He's going to move tonight," he said. She nodded. She already knew. She had calculated it faster than Carver had. "I need to ask you something," he said. She waited. "The Montella contractors. Your father would have needed to make contact with them before the wedding, before you were here, which means he planned this before the arrangement was finalized. He planned a retrieval operation before he handed you over." Nico kept his voice level. "Did he say anything to you in those 4 days between telling you about the arrangement and the wedding? Anything that sounded like he was giving you instructions rather than information?" She was quiet for a moment. "He told me to memorize the layout," she said. Nico went very still. "He told me—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. Something was moving across her face that he couldn't quite read. Not guilt, not quite. Something more complicated than guilt. Something that had layers of coercion folded through it. "He said that wherever I ended up, I should memorize the rooms, the windows, the exterior access points. He said it was something he had always taught me to do, for safety." She said the word safety with the flat irony of someone who understands exactly how language gets inverted in coercive relationships. "He said it was so I could always find a way out. Or so you could always tell him where the ways in were," Nico said. She closed her eyes. "I didn't know that's what it was for," she said. I told him about the library. He called me 4 days after the wedding. He asked how I was settling in, and She stopped again. Her jaw was working. "He asked me what room I spent time in. I told him the library. I told him it faced east. I told him there was a garden between the house and the water." She opened her eyes. "I didn't know." "I know you didn't know. I gave him the information he needed to—" "Vivian." He said her name with enough weight to stop the sentence. He's been doing this your entire life, extracting information from you through the appearance of ordinary conversation. You didn't fail to notice something. He specifically made it unnoticeable. He leaned forward slightly. This is not on you. She looked at her hands around the mug. Her knuckles were white. It put you in danger, she said. We handled it. This time. Yes, this time. He didn't pretend the vulnerability didn't exist. She would have seen through it, and the credibility cost would have been too high. Which is why he needs to be stopped before there's a next time. She looked up at him. Let me help, she said. No, I know how he thinks. I know what he does when he's afraid. I know his backup arrangements and his contingency behavior because I have watched him execute them my entire life. She said it without urgency, without begging. She made the case the way someone makes a case when they know their data is solid and they're presenting it to someone rational enough to hear it. You're going to the airport. You don't know what he looks like when he's running scared because you've only ever seen him performing. I know what he looks like when the performance collapses. You're not coming to the airport. I'm not asking to come to the airport. I'm asking you to sit here for 20 minutes and let me tell you everything I know about how Graham Blackwell behaves when he believes he has nothing left to lose. The kitchen was quiet around them. Outside, Nico could hear Dex moving his security rotation into the revised configuration, the low crunch of footsteps on the gravel path, the click of a radio check. The house was on full lockdown now, the east garden sealed, the water approach under active surveillance. He sat back. 20 minutes, he said. She talked for 35. What she gave him was not tactical intelligence in any formal sense. It was something more granular, and in some ways more useful than that. It was the behavioral cartography of a specific man under specific pressure, assembled from 22 years of proximity to someone who had never been careful about what he revealed to a person he considered property rather than a witness. Graham panicked inward, she said. When the external performance collapsed, he went silent and still rather than loud, the opposite of what people expected. He made his most dangerous decisions in that silence. He had two people he trusted absolutely when everything else was compromised. A man named Ferris, who had been his personal driver and fixer for 15 years, and a lawyer named Cho, who had structured most of his hidden accounts and who had too much liability exposure to ever fully separate from Graham's interests. Cho doesn't know I know about him, she said. My father never mentioned him directly, but I found correspondence once. I was 17, I was looking for... It doesn't matter what I was looking for. I found letters. Cho has been structuring assets since before I was born. He'll be part of the exit plan. Not visibly, but the documentation will have his fingerprints. And Ferris. Ferris will be in the car. Ferris is always in the car. My father doesn't move without Ferris. She paused. Ferris is also the one who... She stopped. A small, precise pause. Ferris carried out some of the things my father ordered. Over the years. Nico looked at her. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The round burns on her left forearm existed in the space between the sentence she had said and the one she had stopped before finishing. He breathed through his nose, kept his voice level. Is there anything else? He has a fallback airfield. He's used it before, once that I know of when there was a regulatory issue that required him to move capital quickly outside conventional documentation. It's not Newark. It's a private strip in Linden, 20 minutes from the Montclair property. Much shorter approach, less oversight. She held his gaze. If he's scared enough, he doesn't go to Newark. He goes to Linden. Nico reached for his phone and sent Reyes a single message. Linden Airfield, private strip, pull everything. The response came back in under 4 minutes. Confirmed. Registered to an LLC with Blackwell fingerprints 6 steps out. Single runway, no tower, low traffic. He put the phone face down on the table and looked at Vivian. She was watching him with the same suspended expression. Not quite belief. Not quite its absence. Waiting. You've been holding that, he said. I didn't know if you'd use it correctly, she said. What does that mean? It means some men, when they have the information they need, stop needing the person who gave it to them. She said it without accusation. A flat, empirical observation about the behavior of a specific category of person. I needed to know which kind you were first. The kitchen was very quiet. From somewhere in the house came the low sound of Dex's voice on the security channel, the measured cadence of a man running a perimeter check with professional efficiency. Nico looked at this woman across the kitchen table. This woman who had been handed to him as an instrument of suffering, who had arrived in his house carrying a record of sustained harm on her body and a survival intelligence in her eyes that she had built out of the wreckage of a childhood that should have been something else entirely, who had just spent 35 minutes giving him the exact intelligence he needed to end this while carefully, systematically testing whether he was the kind of man who would use it against her. He said, "I'm not that kind." She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm starting to think you might not be," she said. His phone lit up. Reyes. Graham's vehicle left Montclair property 6 minutes ago, heading south, toward Linden. Nico was on his feet before the sentence finished rendering. He got Dex on the earpiece. "Lockdown stays active. Nobody in or out. She does not leave this house." "Copy." He was already moving toward the door when Vivian said his name. He turned. She was still at the table, both hands around the mug, looking at him with an expression that had come down to something simple and without performance. "Come back," she said. It was 2 words. They landed with the specific weight of 2 words said by someone who has learned to spend them carefully, because the people they were said to have not always. The rain started 20 minutes outside the estate. Not a gradual build. It came down all at once. The way November rain in the northeast arrives when it has been holding itself back for days and finally stops bothering. The windshield of the lead SUV turned into a moving wall of water, and the wipers fought it at maximum speed and lost the argument by increments. Nico sat in the passenger seat with Reyes's tablet on his knee, tracking the blue dot that was Graham's vehicle moving south on Route 1 toward the Linden approach. Sal was in the back. 2 more vehicles followed. 6 men total, the kind of men Nico had built his operation on. The kind who understood that a job that needed doing, clean and fast, and without the complications that came from improvisation. "He's not stopping," Reyes said through the earpiece from the estate's operations room. "Consistent speed. He knows exactly where he's going." "He always does," Nico said. The airfield came up on the tablet as a thin gray rectangle set back from a service road behind an industrial park in Linden, the kind of facility that existed in the ambiguous territory between legitimate private aviation and the practical needs of people who required mobility without documentation. A single runway, 400 meters, oriented northeast to southwest. 1 hangar, a fuel depot. A small operations building that was staffed irregularly, and tonight, according to the Linden Municipal Registry that Carver had pulled in the last 20 minutes, was not staffed at all, which meant Graham had arranged that too. "Carver," Nico said. "Here." "The accounts. Execute the freeze now. Don't wait for the airfield." A pause. "You said 8 hours out." "I changed my mind. Do it now." Another pause, shorter. "Executing." In the back seat, Sal said nothing. The rain hammered the roof of the SUV with the irregular percussion of a sustained assault, and the highway lights strobed past in the wet dark. Nico thought about Vivian saying "come back." He thought about the weight of 2 words from a person who had learned to spend them carefully. He filed it in the same place he filed things he needed to think about when there was time to think, which was not now. Now was the airfield. The service road that ran behind the industrial park was unlit and unpaved, and the SUV's suspension communicated every rut and pothole directly upward through the frame. Nico had them cut the headlights a quarter-mile out, and they moved the last stretch in the dark, the driver navigating on the tablet's GPS overlay, and the rain covered the engine noise the way rain covers everything, indiscriminately, uselessly loud. The airfield's perimeter fence appeared in the ambient glow of the runway lights. Chain link, 8 feet, topped with wire that had been maintained well enough to mean something. Through the fence and across the wet tarmac, the hangar doors were open. Inside, the runway lights caught the white and silver of a small jet, a Cessna Citation, tail number that matched the charter Reyes had tracked. The plane was already being prepped. A ground crew of 2 moved around it with the efficiency of people who were being paid significantly more than their usual rate to work fast and not ask questions. And at the foot of the air stairs, a black Mercedes was just pulling to a stop. Nico watched through the fence as the rear door opened. Ferris got out first. He was a big man. Not tall exactly, but wide through the shoulders and chest in the way of someone who had spent years being the physical instrument of another man's authority. He moved with the alertness of a professional, scanning the hangar perimeter before he stepped aside and opened the rear door for Graham. Graham Blackwell stepped out of the Mercedes and stood on the wet tarmac and looked small. That was Nico's first thought. He looked small. In the penthouse 11 months ago, Graham had carried the residual architecture of power, the suit and the posture and the performance of a man who had spent decades in rooms where he controlled the terms. Here, in the rain-soaked dark of a private airfield in Linden, with a leather carry-on over his shoulder and 2 security men flanking him and a plane waiting to take him to a life that wasn't his real one, he looked like what he was, a man running. Nico got out of the SUV. "Reyes," he said quietly. "Block the runway approach. Service vehicle, anything. I want that plane on the ground." "Copy. Carver confirms account freeze executed. All 4 accounts locked 40 seconds ago." Nico moved along the fence line toward the access gate, Sal 2 steps behind him, the other 4 men spreading in practiced formation to cover the perimeter approaches. The rain was cold and coming sideways, and it plastered his jacket to his shoulders and ran down the back of his neck, and he didn't notice any of it. He had the gate open in 4 seconds. The lock was a standard padlock, and he had the key because Carver had pulled the facility's management records and found the leasing entity, and the leasing entity's security contractor had a relationship with a man who owed Nico's network a favor of the kind that got paid on short notice. He walked across the tarmac. He was 30 feet from the air stairs when Ferris saw him. Ferris's hand went to his jacket with the automatic speed of trained muscle memory, and Nico said, "Don't," with the particular quality of voice that communicates to professionals that the man speaking has already calculated what happens next and is not concerned about the outcome. And Ferris's hand stopped. Graham turned. The moment Graham Blackwell's eyes found Nico Moretti standing on the tarmac of the Linden airfield in the rain, something happened to his face that Nico had been waiting 11 months to see. The performance collapsed. Not gradually. All at once, the same way the rain had started. The architecture of the man who had sat across from him in the penthouse with bourbon in his hand and a practiced boardroom authority and offered his daughter like a line item on a balance sheet. All of it gone. And what was underneath it was naked and small and afraid. "Nico, don't say my name," Nico said. He kept walking. He stopped 6 feet away and looked at Graham Blackwell in the runway light and felt the 11 months and the grief and the specific cold weight of what this man had done accumulate behind his sternum, like pressure behind a closed door. "Don't say anything yet," Ferris moved, not toward a weapon. He was smarter than that, or he had read the perimeter well enough to know that the men positioned at the fence line made the weapon option a very short story. He moved to put himself between Nico and Graham, the physical interposition of a man doing his job, and Nico looked at him. "Step aside," Nico said. "Mr. Blackwell is—" "Step aside, Ferris." Something in the way he said the name, the specific knowledge of it, the calm with which it was deployed, made Ferris go still. Men got careful when they realized the person in front of them knew more than they should. It created a specific quality of hesitation. Sal appeared at Ferris's left side. Not aggressive, not yet, just present, the way a wall is present, definitively occupying space. Ferris stepped aside. Graham was backing toward the air stairs. His leather carry-on was still over his shoulder and his free hand was out at his side, the unconscious gesture of a man trying to find something to hold on to in an environment that has stopped cooperating. "The accounts are frozen," Nico said. "All 4 of them, as of 4 minutes ago." He watched Graham's face process this. "The charter crew has been informed that this flight will not be departing tonight. The tail number has been communicated to the FAA as part of an ongoing fraud investigation." He paused. "You have no money, no plane, and no exit. And the 2 men you sent to my estate tonight are in a room in my house explaining in some detail who hired them and what they were paid." Graham's jaw worked. "Those men were—" "I know what they were. I know about Montella. I know about Cho." A beat. "I know about Ferris." The name landed the way he intended it to land. Graham's eyes moved to Ferris and back to Nico with the reflexive calculation of a man checking whether an ally has just become a liability. And in that half-second of calculation, Nico saw everything he needed to see about the nature of the relationship. "Whatever you think you know, I know about my brother," Nico said. His voice stayed level. He had decided on the drive over that he would keep it level because the version of this conversation where he lost control of his voice was the version where Graham got to perform victimhood, got to be the frightened man in the rain, and Nico was not going to give him that frame. I know about Victor Pelham. I have recordings and financial records and a witness statement that Victor gave to my people 6 months ago in exchange for a conversation we have not yet had with federal prosecutors. He let that settle. Victor talked for 4 hours. He was thorough. Graham had gone completely still. I have everything, Nico said. I've had it for months. The reason you're standing here instead of already being in a federal holding facility is because I needed you here, on this tarmac, in the rain, with nowhere left to go. He took one step closer. I wanted you to know it was me. Graham's mouth opened. My daughter, he said. The words came out with a specific quality, not remorse, not exactly, but the last resort deployment of the one variable that Graham had not yet introduced into the current calculation. He said my daughter the way a man throws something onto a fire, hoping it changes what burns. What about her, Nico said. She's in your house. She's whatever arrangement you have with her, whatever she's told you, she has a history of Stop. She's unstable. She has been since she was a teenager. There are medical records, I said stop. The level voice cracked on the second word. Just slightly. A fracture in the structure, the first one. Nico felt it and let it be there. Don't put her in your mouth right now. Don't use her name. Don't reference her history. Don't describe her. Don't make her part of whatever you're building in the next 30 seconds. He stepped closer, 1 foot of space between them. You don't get to use her anymore. Graham was shaking. The rain had soaked through his jacket and was running down his face, and his hair was flat against his skull, and he looked 61 years old in a way he had not looked in the penthouse. The specific 61 of a man whose infrastructure has been stripped away and whose body has been reminded that it is not young. What do you want? Graham said. I wanted you to know it was me, Nico said. I already told you that. What are you going to do? Nico looked at him for a long moment. In the 11 months he had spent building this, he had imagined this moment with various endings. The versions his grief had written were violent, clean, final, the kind of ending that closed the account in the oldest terms available. He had not been sentimental about those versions. He was not a man who operated without violence, and he did not pretend otherwise. But standing here in the rain on the Linden tarmac, with Graham Blackwell 6 inches in front of him, Nico found that the ending his grief had written and the ending that felt correct were not the same thing. Death was mercy. He had thought that in Graham's penthouse, and he still believed it. Men like Graham, men who had spent decades operating behind layers of insulation, wealth, lawyers, reputation, the strategic deployment of people weaker than themselves, understood instinctively that the worst thing that could happen to them was not death, but exposure. Exposure was the stripping away of every layer. Exposure was being made visible as what you actually were, in public, permanently, without the resources to construct a counter-narrative. I'm not going to kill you, Nico said. Something moved through Graham's face that might have been relief before it became something else. I'm going to hand you to the federal investigators who have been waiting for the documentation I've been assembling for 11 months. Nico reached into his jacket and produced a phone, turned it to show Graham the screen. A secure messaging thread, a name at the top that Graham recognized because it was the name of the lead investigator on a task force that had been notionally dormant for 3 years and had in fact been active and very well informed. They have everything. Every account, every transfer, every communication with Victor Pelham, every decision that led to my brother standing in that parking structure on a Tuesday night. He held Graham's gaze. They also have the medical records. Your daughters. The ones you thought were sealed. Graham went white. The abuse documentation has been delivered to 3 separate entities, Nico continued. A prosecutor's office, a journalist with the Times who has been working a financial crime story for 8 months and is now working a different story, and a victims advocacy organization whose legal team has been briefed and is prepared to file. He put the phone back in his pocket. Your name, your history, and your specific crimes will be public record within 48 hours. You will not have money, you will not have lawyers capable of managing this exposure, and every person who has ever done business with you will spend the next 6 months aggressively distancing themselves from your name. Graham's breathing had become audible, short, shallow, the breathing of a man whose chest is not cooperating. The people I'm handing you to, Nico said, are not as patient as prison. You understand what I mean by that? Graham understood. His face said so with complete clarity. Victor, he started. Victor is already handled, Nico said. You're the last piece. He stepped back. He turned to Sal and gave a single nod. Sal moved forward with two of the other men, and Ferris. Ferris, who had read the situation with the professional accuracy of a man reassessing which side of the ledger his future resided on, stepped aside without being asked this time. Graham Blackwell was taken by the arms. Not roughly. There was no need for rough. The man had no resistance left in him, and guided toward the vehicle that Reyes had moved into position at the airfield entrance. He didn't fight. He didn't speak. He walked across the wet tarmac in the rain, with his carry-on still over his shoulder and his face doing nothing at all. The face of a man who has used up every expression available to him and arrived at the blank aftermath. Nico stood on the tarmac and watched him go. The rain came down. The Citation's engines, which had been cycling up in preparation for departure, wound back down as the ground crew received the communication that the flight was canceled. The runway lights stayed on, illuminating nothing useful, throwing their pale glow across the wet tarmac and the fence line and the industrial dark beyond. Sal came back to stand beside him. They stood there for a moment without speaking. Marco, Sal said finally. Yes, Nico said. Not more than that. It was enough. His phone buzzed. He looked at it expecting Reyes or Carver, expecting the operational follow-through, the logistics of the handover and the documentation delivery, and the 48-hour sequence he had set in motion. It was from a number he hadn't programmed but recognized. The estate's landline, the number that the kitchen phone used when someone called out from it. He looked at the screen for a moment, then he answered. It's me. Vivian's voice, steady, low. Dex told me the operation was in progress. He wouldn't tell me anything else. A pause. Are you? It's done, he said. The silence on the line lasted 3 seconds. He's in custody? He's in custody. Another silence, longer this time. Are you hurt? She asked. He checked himself automatically, the habit of post-operation inventory. The rain had soaked through to his skin. His knuckles were cold. His jaw ached from being set for the last 90 minutes, but none of it was damage. No, he said. Okay, she said, and then, okay. He heard her breathing on the line, slow, deliberate breathing, the kind you do when you're managing something large. I'll be back in 40 minutes, he said. All right. He ended the call. Sal was looking at him with the expression he wore when he was exercising the specific discipline of not saying what he was thinking. Say it, Nico said. Nothing to say, Sal said. Sal. A beat. The rain came down between them. She called the landline, Sal said, from the kitchen at 11:15 at night because she needed to know. He paused. That's all I'm going to say about it. Nico put the phone in his pocket. He looked at the empty tarmac where Graham Blackwell had stood 6 minutes ago, the blank, wet rectangle of it, runway lights making the rain visible in streaks. And he felt the 11 months conclude. Not with the violence he had imagined and not with the clean certainty of a completed revenge, but with something quieter and more complicated, the specific feeling of a mechanism that has run its full course and gone still. Marco was not standing on the tarmac. His absence was still his absence, as complete and unarguable as it had always been. Nico had known, somewhere in the architecture of everything he had built, that this was true, that no amount of precision or thoroughness or methodical destruction would change the fundamental fact of his brother's absence from the world. He had known that. He walked back to the SUV. The drive back toward the estate ran through the kind of industrial, suburban darkness that New Jersey produced at night. Warehouses and service roads and the orange smear of sodium lights through rain-streaked glass. Sal sat in the back and did not speak, which was the right call. Nico watched the road and thought about Vivian in the kitchen with the landline in her hand, and the specific quality of her voice saying, "Are you hurt?" And he thought about a woman who had spent 22 years learning to ask nothing from anyone because asking had always cost more than the answer was worth, calling the landline at 11:15 because she needed to know. The estate gate came into view through the rain. Dex was at the post, personally, not delegated, which meant he had been there since Nico left and intended to be there until Nico returned. He gave a single nod as the gate opened. The SUV came up the drive. The house was lit on the ground floor. The foyer, the hallway, the kitchen at the east end showing warm yellow through the window. Through that window, as the SUV stopped in front of the main entrance, Nico could see the shape of someone at the kitchen table. He got out of the car. The rain had softened slightly. Still steady, but no longer the lateral assault of the highway. He stood for a moment in the drive with the rain on his face and the smell of wet gravel and the sound moving somewhere beyond the walls. He went inside. The foyer was warm. Elena had left the lights on the low setting, the amber quiet of a house that has been waiting. His footsteps on the marble were the only sound. He walked down the hall toward the kitchen. He stopped in the doorway. Vivienne was at the table. She had a mug in front of her, untouched from the look of it, and the Carver book she had been reading in the library, closed now, set to one side. She was wearing the gray sweater again, and her hair was loose, and she looked up when he appeared in the doorway with an expression that cycled through several things very quickly before settling. He was soaked. He was aware of that. The jacket, the shirt under it, hair flat against his skull the same way Graham's had been, the rain still on his skin. She stood up. She crossed to him and stopped 2 feet away and looked at his face with the careful, specific attention of someone checking an inventory. "You're not hurt," she said. "I told you I wasn't." "You tell me a lot of things." She looked at him for a moment longer. "He's really in custody." "Yes." "Ferris too?" "Yes." He watched her absorb it. "The documentation goes to the Times in the morning. The prosecutor's office already has everything. It's moving." She was quiet. He watched her process it, the thing she had been waiting for without allowing herself to believe it would actually arrive, the end of the mechanism, the removal of the thing that had controlled the terms of her entire life. He watched her process it with the contained precision she applied to everything, and he watched the processing complete, and he watched what was on the other side of the completion move across her face in the kitchen light. It wasn't relief. Not exactly. It was something more complicated than relief. It was the specific expression of someone who has been holding a weight for so long that the removal of the weight doesn't feel like freedom yet. Feels first like the unfamiliar sensation of not holding something, the phantom pressure of an absence. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum, breathed. "Okay," she said, barely audible. "Okay," he said. They stood in the kitchen doorway in the quiet of the house with the rain on the windows and the estate security running its perimeter in the dark outside. And the distance between them was 2 feet and also something else. Something that had been building from the moment in the penthouse when he had said yes for reasons he thought he understood and had in fact understood nothing about. She looked up at him. "What happens now?" she said. He opened his mouth to answer, and from Sal's direction, from the front of the house, came the sound of the door. Not Sal's footstep, not any expected return, but the specific sharp sound of entry that was wrong in its rhythm, wrong in its pace, wrong in the way that every trained instinct in Nico's body recognized before his conscious mind had finished processing it. The door opened, and the man who came through it was not Sal, and was not Dex, and was not anyone Nico had cleared for entry tonight, and in his right hand was something that caught the foyer light in a way that the man in the foyer was Cho. Nico had never met him in person, had only seen the photographs his network had assembled. The careful, candid surveillance images of a 60-year-old tax attorney who moved through the world with the unremarkable precision of someone who had spent a career being invisible by design. In the photographs, Cho had looked like what he was, a functionary, a facilitator. The kind of man whose entire professional value resided in the fact that no one ever looked at him twice. He did not look like that now. He looked like a man who had received a phone call 40 minutes ago, from Graham, from the car, the last call Graham had made before Sal took the phone, and who had understood in the course of that call that everything he had built his professional survival on was gone, and who had made the specific decision that desperate men make when they have nothing left to protect except the possibility of walking away from everything that is about to collapse on top of them. The thing in his right hand was a gun. Small caliber, the kind that fits in a jacket pocket. The kind that a man who is not a violent man buys because the idea of having it makes him feel less exposed, and then one day finds himself actually holding. His hand was shaking, not slightly. The gun moved in a visible arc with each pulse of his heartbeat, the tremor of a man whose adrenaline had exceeded the structural limits of his composure. Nico stood in the kitchen doorway and did not move. Behind him, he heard Vivian go absolutely still, the cessation of breath, the physical compression of someone making themselves smaller without moving their feet. "Cho," Nico said. The man's eyes moved to him. They were red at the rims, the eyes of someone who had been sitting with a very bad situation for several hours before deciding to do something about it. "It's over," Cho said. His voice cracked on the second word, and he pressed through it. You have the accounts. You have Graham. You have everything. What you're going to give to the Times." He stopped, swallowed. "My name is in those files." "Yes," Nico said. "I can't. If my name goes to the Times, I know." "Then you know why I'm here." Nico looked at the gun, calculated the distance, 12 feet, the width of the foyer hallway. The gun was shaking. Cho's finger was on the trigger with the inexpert pressure of someone who had not trained, who did not know that the index finger does not belong inside the guard until the moment of intent, who did not know how much or how little pressure a trigger required. Dangerous in a specific way, not because Cho was capable, but because incapable men with shaking hands and nothing to lose operated outside the logic that made threats manageable. "You drove here," Nico said. Conversational, level, the specific register of someone who is not afraid and needs the other person to understand that without making it a challenge. "Tonight. From wherever you were when Graham called, you drove here in the rain with that in your jacket." "I need those files," Cho said. "The documentation you gave to the prosecutor. I need to know what's in it. I need to know if there's a deal available. I need—" His voice broke again. "I spent 30 years. I spent 30 years building a practice. I have a family. I have—" "Put the gun down, Cho." "I can't." "You can. You're going to, because this is not what you are." Nico took one step forward, slow, deliberate, the way you move toward a fire you don't want to spread. "You're not this. You're a tax attorney who made bad decisions for a bad client over a long period of time, and you are in serious legal trouble, and none of that gets better if you do what you came here thinking you might do." Cho's eyes went past Nico, to Vivian. She was still in the kitchen doorway, 3 feet behind Nico and to his left, and she was standing with her arms at her sides and her chin level, looking at Cho with an expression that was not afraid. Not performing courage, she had simply arrived, in this moment, at a place past the performance of anything, and what was there instead was just the clear-eyed steadiness of someone who has been in dangerous rooms before and knows that fear is a luxury for later. "You're her," Cho said. "Yes, he is chin banai chas," Vivian said. "He talked about you." Cho's gun hand dipped slightly, the weight of it finding the limit of his wrist strength. "Graham, he talked about you like you were—" He stopped. Something moved through his face. I knew what he was doing, for years." The confession arrived without preamble, the words of a man who has been carrying something for a very long time and has just run out of the energy required to keep carrying it. "I structured the accounts that gave him the leverage, the money that paid for the apartment, paid for the access." He looked at Vivian. "I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself I was a lawyer, not a—" "Put the gun down," Nico said. He had moved 3 feet closer during Cho's speech, slow enough to be below the threshold of threat response, each step measured. He was 9 feet away now. 8. "If I put it down, you hand me to the prosecutor. I hand you to the prosecutor either way. The question is what you hand me in return." Nico stopped moving. "Graham is in custody. Victor Pelham gave us 4 hours of testimony 6 months ago. What I don't have, what the prosecutor doesn't have, is the full account structure. The shell entities that aren't in Graham's primary files. The transfers that Carver's team flagged but couldn't fully trace." He held Cho's gaze. "You know where they all go. You built them." Cho stared at him. "You want me to—" "I want you to put the gun down. Then I want you to sit in my office and tell me everything. Tonight. All of it." A beat. In the morning, I make a call to the prosecutor's office. I tell them I have a cooperative witness with comprehensive knowledge of the account infrastructure. That call changes the terms of what happens to you, not eliminates, changes. You can't promise me. I'm not promising you anything. I'm telling you the arithmetic. Nico extended his right hand, palm up, 6 feet from Cho's gun hand. Your name goes in the Times regardless. That's already done. I can't pull it back and wouldn't. Your practice is finished. That's the reality, and both of us know it. He kept his hand out. But there's a version of what happens next where you still have the family you just mentioned, and there's a version where you don't. The gun decides which version we're in. The foyer was absolutely silent. The rain had slowed to a steady presence against the windows. No longer the assault of the highway, just the constant low percussion of water on glass, the sound the night made when it had nothing left to prove. Cho looked at the gun in his own hand. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he picked up without fully deciding to, finding it there with a kind of muted surprise, the dissociation of actions that were undertaken in a state of extremity and are now arriving at their consequences in real time. His hand came down. The gun dropped into Nico's palm with the weight of something that was never going to be fired. Nico had known it the moment he saw the tremor, had calculated the real danger at about 40% and falling, a number that was still not acceptable, but that had given him the latitude to move and speak instead of doing the other thing. He put the gun in his jacket pocket. He looked at Cho, this 60-year-old man standing in the foyer in a rain-damp coat with red-rimmed eyes and the posture of someone who has just set down a weight and hasn't decided yet if the relief is worth what it cost. "Sit down," Nico said. "I'll get someone to make coffee." Cho sat down on the bench in the foyer like his legs had decided before he did. Nico turned to Vivian. She was looking at him. The expression on her face had several layers, and he could read most of them now. He was getting better at reading her, had been getting better across the course of this week, in the incremental way that proximity to a careful person teaches you the language of their careful face. The top layer was the residual alertness of the last 3 minutes. Under that, something that processed and filed and moved on. Under that, something that looked at him with a quality he still didn't have a precise name for, but that had been building since the kitchen 2 nights ago, and the library yesterday, and the tarmac phone call an hour ago. "Go to bed," he said quietly. "I'll be in the office for a while." "I know," she said. She looked at Cho on the bench for a moment, not with anger exactly, but with the specific attention of someone documenting something they have already decided how to feel about, but want to make sure they have seen clearly. Then she went upstairs. Nico sat in his office with Cho for 3 hours. What Cho gave him was comprehensive. 30 years of meticulous record-keeping, the professional habit of a man who had understood from the beginning that his own protection resided in knowing more than anyone else, and who had, with the specific calculation of the truly frightened, maintained shadow records of everything he had ever done for Graham Blackwell, in a format that could be deployed when the day came that deploying them was his only remaining option. That day had come. By 2 in the morning, Nico had account numbers, entity names, transfer histories, and the names of 6 additional individuals who had participated in the infrastructure at various points. He had the name of the man Graham had used to arrange Victor Pelham's original contract. He had, buried in a 2019 transfer record that Cho produced from memory with the dead-eyed accuracy of a man reciting scripture he has learned to hate, the financial thread that connected Graham directly and irrefutably to Marco's death. Not Victor, not a proxy. Graham's own account, Graham's own authorization, a transfer made 11 days before Tuesday night in a Hell's Kitchen parking structure. Nico sat with that document on the desk in front of him for a long time. He had known. He had known for 11 months, had built his entire operation on knowing, had stood on a tarmac in the rain and looked Graham Blackwell in the face with the full weight of knowing. But there was something different about a piece of paper. Something different about the specific rectangle of a printed transfer record with a date and an amount and a name. The documentary fact of it, the irreducible permanence of a decision rendered into numbers. Marco, 26 years old, quick to laugh. He folded the document and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, against his chest. He sent Cho to the secure room on the ground floor that had been used for exactly this kind of overnight holding. Not a cell, a room with a lock on the outside, a bed, a bathroom, the minimum requirements of adequate treatment, with a clear understanding that in the morning Nico would make the call to the prosecutor's office and Cho's cooperation would begin its formal recorded phase. At 2:30, he went upstairs. He stood in the hallway outside Vivian's door for a moment. He knocked, a beat. Then, "Come in." She was awake. Had not been asleep, he suspected, or had been in that particular threshold state of someone too alert for sleep and too exhausted for full consciousness. She was sitting up in the bed with the lamp on low, the Carver book in her lap, and she looked at him when he came in with an expression that read the whole shape of the last 3 hours in the set of his face. "You got what you needed from him," she said. "Yes." "Is it enough?" "More than enough." She nodded. Her hands were in her lap, the book set aside. He pulled the chair from the writing desk, the same chair he had pulled the first night, and sat in it, 3 feet from the bed, the lamp between them. "There's a transfer record," he said, "from Graham's account, 11 days before Marco died." He said it without preamble because he had decided at some point in the last hour that she had earned directness, had been earning it across the whole course of this week in ways he had not fully accounted for until now. "It's not circumstantial. It's his name, his account, his authorization." She was quiet for a moment. "That's what you needed to close it," she said. "That's what the prosecutor needs to make it irrefutable." He looked at his hands. "It's already irrefutable to me. It's been irrefutable for 11 months. But now it's on paper. Now it's on paper." She looked at him. The lamp threw its warm circle between them and outside the windows. The rain had finally stopped, the Long Island Sound settling into its post-storm quiet, the kind of silence that arrived after sustained weather and felt earned. "I'm sorry about Marco," she said. Not the same words as before. She had said, "I'm sorry" in the library, which was the conventional form, the appropriate social response. This was different. This was said with the specific weight of someone who had spent the last several hours in the proximity of a grief that was not hers and had chosen to say something true about it instead of something adequate. Nico looked at her. He would have... He stopped. This was not something he did. This particular sentence, the one that started with "he would have." He had refused it for 11 months because it opened a door he couldn't close. He would have thought this whole thing was insane, he said. The wedding, the estate, all of it. A beat. He would have told me I was doing it wrong from the beginning. Was he usually right about things like that? He was usually right about most things. He was wrong about Graham. A pause. Once? She nodded. They sat with that for a moment. The annulment paperwork, Nico said. He said it because it needed to be said, because he had been the one to set the terms. And the terms included this, had always included this, and the integrity of having said it required him to say it again now that the conditions had been met. "I'll have my lawyer draw it up tomorrow. It'll be clean. Nothing contested, no obligation. The financial recovery from Graham's accounts, the portion that originated from legitimate Blackwell family assets before Graham's crimes, belongs to you. My lawyers will structure it." He looked at her. "You can leave whenever you want. Go wherever you want. You have resources, and you have no obligation to anyone in this house." She listened to all of it. Then she said, "Is that what you want?" He sat with the question. It was the right question, asked in the right way. Not manipulative, not performing any particular answer into him, just the clean inquiry of someone who wanted to know the actual fact of the matter and had decided to ask directly instead of reading around it. "No," he said. The lamp hummed between them. "No," she said. Not surprised, not triumphant, just the confirmation of something she had been holding carefully, checking against the available evidence, not allowing herself to rely on until the person who needed to say it said it. "I don't know what it looks like," he said. "I'm not... I know what I am. I know what this house is and what my life is, and it doesn't look like anything you should want." "You don't get to tell me what I should want," she said. Not hard, even. "No," he said. "I know. I know what your life is," she said. "I've been in this house for a week. I'm not under any illusions about the nature of your operation or the people who work for you or what it means to be in proximity to all of it." She looked at him with those unrevealing dark eyes that were, he had learned, not unrevealing at all once you learned their language. I have spent 22 years being under illusions constructed by someone else for his own purposes. I know the difference between that and a clear view of something I'm choosing with full information. Vivian, I'm not asking for a promise, she said. I'm not asking you to be something you're not. I'm asking you to let me stay because I want to stay, which is something I have not been permitted to do before, and I would like to do it now. The room was quiet. Outside, the sound moved against the shore with the particular rhythm of water after a storm. Slower than usual, still working through the residual energy of the weather, finding its way back to its own pattern. Nico looked at her. He thought about the first night, the car, the estate. Welcome to your new prison, said with the deliberate cruelty of a man who believed he was delivering the last act of a revenge he had authored. He thought about the kitchen 2 nights ago, with the 2 coffee mugs on the table and the things she had said in the flat, pragmatic way she said things. I've been an instrument before. I know how to function as one. And the way those words had arrived in his chest like a hand pressing against a door that had been closed for 11 months. He thought about the burn marks on her left forearm. 2 of them. Round. Deliberate. 3 weeks before the wedding. He thought about Sal saying the reason matters. All right, he said. She looked at him. All right, he said again, and this time it was not the confirmation of an operational parameter or the acknowledgement of a tactical outcome. It was the other kind of all right, the kind that meant something different, the kind that opened instead of closed. She breathed. It was a small thing, just the exhale of someone who has been holding something at a careful distance for a long time and has finally, with sufficient evidence and sufficient cause, allowed themselves to set it down. Not relief exactly. Something quieter than relief. The specific feeling of a door that has been held shut for so long, the person on the other side has forgotten what it felt like to have it open. Go to sleep, he said. He stood. Put the chair back at the writing desk. I'll be downstairs. You should sleep too, she said. I will. He was at the door when she said, Nico. He turned. She was looking at him across the room in the low lamplight, with her hands quiet in her lap and her hair loose, and the Carver book on the bedside table, and the sound outside the window working its way back to its own rhythm. Thank you, she said. Not the kitchen thank you, not the careful courtesy of someone acknowledging a specific action. This was the other kind. The kind that meant the whole of it, the week and the coffee and the chair he had pulled twice, and the questions he had asked and the answers he had not required, and the tarmac phone call, and the annulment paperwork he had offered without being asked. The kind that meant she had been seen and had not been destroyed by it, which for this specific person in this specific life was not a small thing. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Get some sleep, he said. He went downstairs. The morning came the way mornings came on the north shore of Long Island after a storm. Salt in the air, the light coming in off the water at an angle that made everything look cleaned, the sky a pale, clear gray that was not quite blue, but was working toward it. Nico was in his office at 6, which was normal, but the reports he was reading were different from the ones he had been reading for 11 months. Not the operational tracking of Graham's movements and accounts and escape infrastructure. The follow-through, the prosecutor's office, the Times journalist who had sent 3 messages overnight confirming receipt and asking 2 pointed follow-up questions that Nico's lawyer would answer. The victim's advocacy organization whose lead attorney had already filed 2 preliminary motions. The machine of consequence running under its own power now. He made the call to the prosecutor's office at 7:15, confirmed Cho's cooperation, gave the name of his own attorney as the contact for documentation transfer. The voice on the other end was professionally neutral and carefully unhurried, the voice of someone who had been waiting for this call for a while and was not going to let the satisfaction of it show. When he hung up, he sat for a moment with the phone on the desk. Marco. 26 years old, quick to laugh. The grief was not gone. He had never expected it to be gone, had never believed that the architecture of the last 11 months was a structure that could contain grief, only one that could give it direction. Direction had been necessary. Direction had been the difference between drowning and moving, but the direction had completed. The structure had served its purpose. And what he was left with, sitting in his father's office in the early morning with the sound going pale gold outside the window, was the grief in its actual shape. Not the operational form he had been carrying, the compressed fuel of it, but the real thing, The absence of a 26-year-old who had been quick to laugh and wrong about Graham Blackwell exactly once. He let it be there. For the first time in 11 months, he let it be there without turning it into something useful. Elena arrived at 7, and he heard her moving in the kitchen, the familiar sounds of the house beginning its morning. At 7:30, he heard the creak of the stairs, the specific creak of the fourth step that he had been hearing his whole life, and that had never been repaired because his mother believed old houses deserved the sounds they had earned. Vivian appeared in the office doorway. She was dressed, dark pants, a different sweater, her hair pulled back. She looked rested in the specific way of someone who had finally, after a significant deficit, slept without waking. She looked at him. "You didn't sleep," she said. "I slept some. You look like you slept some." She came in without being invited, which was new. The first time she had entered any room in the house without explicit permission or direction. The first small exercise of the occupancy she had asked for last night and been given. She sat in the chair across from the desk, the chair where his lawyers sat when they needed to discuss things, and looked at him with the careful reading she applied to his face. "Did you make the call?" "Yes." "And Cho?" "Cooperative. His lawyer arrives at 9. He'll be processed through proper channels today." "And the times?" "The story runs tomorrow morning." She absorbed this sequence with the same contained precision she absorbed everything. Then she said, "Graham won't get a deal." "No." "Good." She said it simply, without performance, the statement of a straightforward conclusion. He looked at her across the desk. "The annulment paperwork," he said. "I told you last night what I wanted. I know what you told me. I want to make sure it was that you weren't saying it because of the circumstances, the adrenaline, I don't make decisions based on adrenaline," she said. "I have spent 22 years making decisions based on survival arithmetic in high-pressure situations. I know the difference." She held his gaze. "I know what I said." He was quiet for a moment. "It's not a simple life," he said. "What I do, what this house is. I know. There will be things you don't want to know about. Things that happen through my operation that they're not clean things. I know that too. I'm not asking you to be comfortable with it. I'm asking you to understand it clearly before Nico." She said his name with the gentle authority of someone stopping a sentence that has already made its point. "I understand it clearly. I have been living inside complicated situations my entire life. The difference is that this one is the first one where the person at the center of it has not been using me as a mechanism." She paused. "That matters more than the complexity." He looked at her for a long moment. Sal appeared in the doorway. He had come in through the back entrance, which he always did, the habit of a man who had been navigating this house since before Nico was the one who ran it. He looked at Nico. He looked at Vivian in the lawyer's chair across the desk. He looked at Nico again with the expression of a man exercising the specific discipline of absolute non-commentary. "Cho's lawyer called ahead," Sal said, "arriving at 8:45. And the perimeter crew flagged the Montella contractors. The owner is requesting a conversation." "Tell him the conversation will be with my lawyer," Nico said. "Tell him to expect it." Sal nodded. He was almost out of the doorway when he stopped, turned back. He looked at Vivian. "Mrs. Moretti," he said. It was the first time anyone in the house had used the name. He said it with the careful, professional neutrality of a man who had decided something and was rendering it in the only form available to him. Vivian looked at him. "Mr. Cavarero," she said. Something moved through Sal's face that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same territory. He left. Nico looked at his desk, then at her. "He's been with my family since I was 19, he said. "I know. He looks at you the way people look at someone they've watched become who they are." He absorbed this. "Come on," he said. He stood. "Elena will have breakfast. You should eat." She stood too. They walked down the hallway toward the kitchen and through the window at the end of the hall. The Long Island Sound was coming up gold in the morning light, the storm-cleared water running out flat and calm to the horizon, the kind of morning that arrived after bad weather and made no comment about what had preceded it. In the kitchen, Elena had left bread and eggs and a pot of coffee on the counter. 2 mugs already set out. Nico poured coffee, handed her one. She took it with both hands, the way she always did, and looked out the kitchen window at the water. "It's a good view," she said. Yes. Is it always like this after a storm? Usually. He stood beside her at the window. Outside, the light was moving across the sound in the way it moved on clear mornings, in sheets, the way weather moved, changing the color of the water every few seconds from gray to gold to something between the two. The storms clean it out. It comes back quieter. She looked at the water for a moment. Then she looked at him. He looked back. Between them, 2 coffee mugs and a kitchen window, and the sound going gold in the morning light, and the specific weight of a week that had contained more than weeks, are usually asked to carry, grief and violence, and the slow catastrophic dismantling of everything both of them had believed about why they were in the same room together. He reached out and put his hand over hers where it rested on the counter. Not a gesture with any performance in it. Not the careful orchestration of a man who knew how to use tenderness as a tool. Just the placement of one hand over another, the oldest form of one person communicating to another person that they are not alone in the room. She looked down at it. Then she turned her hand over and her fingers closed around his, and she looked back at the water. The sound ran out to the horizon, quiet after the storm. The scars on her forearm caught the morning light through the window, and he did not look away from them, and neither did she. They stood in the kitchen and drank their coffee and watched the water, and the light moved across it in sheets, patient and without commentary, the way light moved across things that had been through weather and come out the other side. Outside, the day was beginning. Inside, something else was beginning too, not loudly, not with the dramatic clarity of a conclusion, but in the quiet way that things begin when they are real, slowly, imperfectly, with the full knowledge of the cost already paid and the unguaranteed shape of what came next. 2 people, 1 window, the water going gold. It was enough. For the first time, for both of them, it was enough.